If the economy is initially in long-run equilibrium, which statement best describes the effects of a shift in aggregate demand? So here in this chapter, we're not looking at monetary or fiscal policy. We're just looking at the economy shifting around and recovering on its own. So if we're in a long-run equilibrium, we would have that intersection point between aggregate demand, aggregate supply, and long-run aggregate supply. What happens from a shift in aggregate demand? Prices and output are affected only in the short run. Prices are impacted in the short run, but they're also impacted in the long run because it would shift to the right to this inflationary output gap. And then as prices would adjust, wages would adjust, the S curve would go up and we would have higher prices with not a higher level of output. So prices are affected in the long and short run, but output only in the short run, this one here, not in the long run. In the long run, we always kind of merge back to this potential output, this situation where there's just natural rate of unemployment. Prices and output are affected in both in the short and long run. That is false. So if you're not sure about this, draw the diagram with all three curves. Make the 80 curve shift first. It's going to give you an intersection point to the right. You could see it on one of the graphs lower down in this practice quiz. And then what will happen afterwards is this convergence back due to an increase in wages and aggregate supply curve shifting left. So prices will move in both short and long run, but output will increase temporarily and then go back to the same level in the long run. When taxes increase, consumption decreases. How is this situation represented in the aggregate demand and aggregate supply model? Well, when taxes increase, we'll talk about this more as contractionary fiscal policy, and we're impacting consumption, and consumption is one of the components of GDP, and we said that when one of those components changes, it's the aggregate demand curve that will shift. And in this case here, if there's consumption that falls, aggregate demand will fall, so it could either shift down or to the left. We typically say to the left, so let's try to find it. By a movement, no. By a shifting aggregate demand to the left, that is the right answer. By movement, no. And by shifting aggregate supply to the left, no. We're talking about aggregate demand at this stage. How does the size of investment as a fraction of GDP compare to its importance in creating economic fluctuations? So overall, if you were to calculate the proportion of GDP that is investment, or the percentage of GDP that is investment, investment is a very small part of real GDP, so it would actually be one of these two. But investment accounts for a large share of the fluctuation in real GDP. When we're going through a recession, government spending may fall a little bit. Net exports may change a little bit. Consumption may change a little bit, but what really changes a lot is the level of investment. How much firms are spending into new projects, new residential construction, and other things like that really are the ones that get hit the hardest when we're going through a recession. Suppose that there has been bad weather resulting in a temporary decrease in the availability of oil and the economy has reached its new short-run equilibrium. What happens as the economy moves from this short-run equilibrium to a long-run equilibrium? So here we would have this situation where we had this long-run equilibrium, and now all of a sudden decrease in the availability of oil is the same as saying an increase in the price of oil. The aggregate supply curve would shift to the left. As this happens, we would be going towards higher prices and lower output. But when we move back, wages will eventually drop. So during this recovery phase, output will naturally rise again. We have to have output rises because we're going through from recession back to a long-run equilibrium, so output has to rise. And prices wouldn't rise further. They would actually fall back. And we could see it here on these graphs, all of these questions we've had so far. How would an increase in the money supply move the economy in the short run? Well, if we're in a long-run equilibrium, an increase in the money supply would shift aggregate demand to the right first, as we're making more money available for investment. And then since we're going through an inflationary output gap or a boom, eventually wages would adjust and we'd move back to this long-run equilibrium. So the same kind of questions that have happened earlier, it's that kind of effect that we're looking for. So it would move from C to D would be a drop and aggregate supply, or like in drop in aggregate supply, which could have been caused by that less oil available or the higher price of oil. This is not the case here. This is an increase in the money supply. From C to B, yeah, that's what we said, and in the short run, and back to A in the long run, that's what we just went through. From C to D is still wrong, and from C to B in the short run and the long run, that's false, because we can't stay at B in the long run. We're in an inflationary output gap. We're in an overheating economy. Wages will eventually adjust. So hopefully that clarifies the questions for chapter 14.